Well, welcome to another episode of B-Sides. I am Pastor John, and I'm here with my co-belligerent partner in crime, Pastor Rusten. How you doing?
Good.
Hey, doing well. How's your Monday?
It's good. It's kind of an interesting weather day. Gray, then sunny, and it's Monday.
Yeah. And then after a weekend where it was like 80 degrees,
I know.
now it's like Washington 70.
No, our spring to summer is so schizophrenic. It is just always all over the place.
Yeah. But honestly, I will take the 70 over the 90.
Yeah. I like it hot.
Do you really?
I do. Yeah.
I did not know that about you.
I've never had a house that really gets hot. Well, actually, I did have an apartment once that gets hot, so that is hard when it gets hot. But my house doesn't really get super hot in the sunny days, so it's nice. It's like you go inside, it's cool. You go outside, it's hot.
Yeah.
It changes your outlook when your house is nice and comfortable.
Yeah. Do you have AC in your house?
We do not, but we do have a unit that if it is getting towards the edge, we'll just pop it in a window, and it kind of balances it all out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our house is old, and there's no AC, and it has direct sunlight for most of the day. So when we get into those stretches where it's like 3, 4, 5 days of like 90 plus, it just gets brutal.
It gets hot.
We all commit to, we're going to get an AC next year. And then I'm like, no, we're not.
Yeah.
Anyways, speaking of hot, we're in the 10 Commandments. And which one are we on today? 6? No,
we're on
5.
Yeah, 5.
6?
No, 7. 7.
7,
Yes.
8, 9, 10. Yeah, 7. Okay. And this is the one that you preached on.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very long. It is, you shall not commit adultery.
Yes.
Which is, it sounds like a small commandment, but it's actually quite far-reaching in its implications.
Yep.
One of the things that, starting with the first commandment, that I was trying to get people used to is thinking about what each commandment teaches us about human nature and God's nature, both explicitly and implicitly. So with like the first commandment, we talked about like having no other gods. I talked about the fact that we are worshiping beings. We're fundamentally worshiping beings, and that worship is inescapable, which is why and that's all implied with the first commandment, even though it doesn't say those very words. It's all implied there. So like the first commandment, this commandment implies all sorts of stuff about human sexuality, and it happens to be June, and I noticed some rainbow colors on the books behind you.
I know. I always feel like, Lexham Press really kind of like went weird with their Kuiper colors. This is the collection of Abraham.
Kuiper?
This is Abraham Kuiper's collection.
Oh my gosh!
I know, and it always cracks me up because it is very, it's very rainbowy.
Yeah, it's
They're
really
great.
funny.
They are
Kuiper.
great. I know they are great volumes though. Really awesome. Like there was a whole bunch of translation done in the last, I want to say 10, 15 years, and it just like great volumes, really well printed. Lexham does a really good job, but like I thought it was funny when they're coming out in this like, bright colored stuff.
Yeah, well, especially with Kuiper, because I remember the his lectures on Calvinism, which was that was at Princeton, wasn't it, or was it Yale?
Yep.
Princeton.
Princeton. Yep.
Yeah, he saw Pride Month coming about 140 years before it was here. But anyways, we're digressing.
He saw a lot of things coming.
Yeah. And he
Yes.
wasn't a prophet. He was just connecting the dots.
Yep. Kind of like Schaefer, Lewis, all those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this commandment, just a couple words. What are some of the things that this commandment assumes about human nature and reality and all the things?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I thought of, I don't think I included this in the sermon, but I was like, you really can't have thou shalt not commit adultery if you don't have the concept of male and female. Right? So like, it implicitly assumes God's created order of male and female, and that those are the parts of what makes up a marriage. husband and wife. And so that's one, is it teaches it's based upon a um, a creational understanding of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is that it it assumes or it implies that covenant bonds, i.e., the bond of marriage, is like what Jesus said. It's something that that God enforces because he's the one who makes it happen. He's the one who
Mm.
actually brings together husband and wife and makes them one. This is
Yeah.
why adultery is so egregious, is because it violates the bond that God put in place.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of, now those are the kind of big ticket implications. There's a lot of downstream implications of this command, and what, like the Westminster guys would suggest it also implies in terms of commandments, right? So like, to say thou shalt not commit adultery means implicitly also means you should uphold your covenant vows, right? You should you should enjoy and celebrate sexuality as God has designed it within the bonds of
Mm.
marriage.
Mm-hmm.
You should honor marriage. You should honor the marriage bed. You should there, and because of that, there's a lot of because adultery is very specific. It's about a married person having a sexual relationship with somebody other than their spouse. That's what, like, technically adultery is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at, like, the Westminster guys, when they talked about, like, what does this require, what does it prohibit, they were like, well, if you really take this, all the implications to heart, it basically is a denunciation of all sexual sin, right?
Mm.
Because to say thou shalt not commit adultery also assumes that God's order is marriage, and so any deviation from marriage or
Yeah.
perversion of marriage, i.e., what gets called gay marriage today, would be a violation of it.
Yeah.
As well as any sexual perversion. So they like to list those things. They listed like everything they could think of. And I think when I preached this sermon, I gave most of, not even all of, the Westminster Larger Catechism answer to what is prohibited. I didn't even list the long list. They say what's required.
Mm-hmm.
But like, under the what's required, they say, well, it's not just about not committing adultery. It also assumes the normal, regular, covenant renewal of a healthy marriage, right?
Stoke the fires.
Stoke the fires of in the hearth of marriage, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and this also means that God is not a prude, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not
Yeah.
he's not like embarrassed about the creation he made. He has designed it. It's God's good design, and he wants it to see, for our sake, us obey his design, because that's what leads to flourishing and joy and delight. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
and that covenantal bond is also and that relationship, that marriage relationship, is the context where, of course, children come into the mix,
Mm-hmm.
and where the Lord is gracious to give them. And that situation, like, the marriage bond is really important for the sake of children as well, right? It's protective of them. It's also like, when mom and dad are loving each other, the kids are also in an environment where they're benefiting from that love of husband and wife pouring out as father and mother on the children. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think one of the things I've heard said, and I've repeated, is the most important way to love your kids is, first, for husband and wife to love each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've said this before on podcasts, but I think it's a really healthy thing for a mom and a dad to be affectionate.
Yeah.
Right up to the point of making your kids uncomfortable.
Exactly. I remember. I might not. I don't even know if I had kids yet, but I remember having a conversation with you once, and I think that you were expressing that affection towards your wife in the kitchen or something like that, and your kids were younger, and they were like, "Oh, mom and dad, they're acting married," and you're like,
Yeah.
"Yes,
Yes.
yes, we are
Yeah.
acting married. That's right."
Yeah. That's exactly what they used to say. Well, they still say that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Not every kid grows up in a home where mom and dad act that way.
I know. So
And
important.
it robs them of something.
Yeah, and you think about what what we learn in the New Testament about marriage, pointing us to Christ and the church. And so,
Absolutely.
if your marriage is not displaying this, and then you're also lying about the gospel, right? There's such a important, like the affection between husband and wife are supposed to be a catechism lesson for kids of what the affection of Christ is for the church and what the church's affection ought to be for Christ. So there's those two. It's very, very important, and these kind of things are caught more than taught. And so it's really it's God's design is also the best catechesis.
Yeah, it's absorbed in a home where the aroma is warm and affection, and dad chases mom around the house every once in a while. In a playful way.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that same word. Like there should be playfulness in the house is a sign of health. Yeah, a marital and familial health.
Yep,
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. So so you touched on some of the assumptions behind that commandment. I want to talk about one of them.
Sure.
And maybe we'll get into more because it's like the fifth commandment, to honor mom and dad. How every assumption that's baked into that commandment is contested territory.
Oh yeah,
like every single thing. And this is another one of those areas where there's not a whole lot of people that are going to say, "Oh, you should steal from your neighbor," right? There are some, but generally speaking,
mostly peaceful stealing.
Government stealing, that's a different.
Oh yeah, true that.
But this is one of those things where literally every assumption that's in the background that this commandment is built on is contested. So I want to bring up some of those because there's arguments that people make, and I know that people who are listening, they're going to encounter these arguments, and I know that both of us have encountered them. That a same-sex union, I don't want to say the word marriage, but the same-sex marriage that is monogamous honors this commandment. How would you respond to
survey
that?
says no.
Yeah.
So I would respond to that by saying, Christ, when he talks about man, the man and woman becoming one flesh, he talks about how God is the one who joins them together, right? And he says, the man, he leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and the two become one flesh. And then he says, let not what God is, let not man separate what God has joined, right? Well, God never has put a man and a man together in that way. And so that's where, we don't even like using their word of like same-sex marriage. I like the term same-sex mirage that someone we know likes to use because it does justice.
The Dougie Wilson.
Yeah, this Douglas Dilson. Yes.
Douglas Dilson.
So
I've never heard that before. That's hilarious.
Same-sex mirage is, that's a better term because it's just not even what it's a complete farce. It's a complete like imaginative self-creative act in opposition to what God does. So to say marriage is anything other than what God joins, that's what makes a marriage a marriage. Is God's the one who makes the bond, makes the two one flesh. Yeah. God doesn't do that with the man and the man. He doesn't do that with and there's also a physical component here that that speaks to the reality, and the physical components here also speak to the lie of quote unquote same sex mirage. Yeah. So Yeah, that's the idea that what the commandment really is after is monogamy, right? Just monogamy, like rather than um, God's design of which is given to us in the garden as a man and a woman joined together.
Mm-hmm.
The two made one flesh. I that that's just gymnastics to get the scripture to do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
There's also when God says it's not good for man to be alone, right? And he creates a helper suitable for him, and that is his wife. It's the woman, right? He did not make another man, and in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, if it was just another man would still be alone in terms of being the only that one part, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
not a help. It's not a helper suitable for him. It's a mirror image of himself, which is just like another form of being alone. Being like
Yeah.
with your like yourself, but in
That would
a
only have compounded the loneliness.
yes, I mean yeah, exactly. It'd be like because he's looking at the animals. He's like every one of these animals has a counterpart,
Yeah.
that is the grounds by which these animals are fruitful and multiply, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that, right?
Yeah.
That's also the commandment. Like the two being joined as one flesh also has a telos, a goal in mind, and the
Yeah.
goal is be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
And
And fill the earth.
you can't get that with the monogamous same-sex mirage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually, you mentioned this, and I'm just going to repeat it, that there is a textual issue in which we have words that define marriage. So from beginning to end, it's a husband and leave his mother and father
Yep.
and cleave to his wife, right?
Always.
That's what marriage is. That is the definition of marriage. You also have a physical, biological reality here, and without being like super like explicit, like Legos only go together one way.
Yeah, that's true.
And extension cords work a certain way, and the male body and the female body are meant to complement one another, and that is plainly clear in the glorious differences
Yep.
between a male body and a female body, and and it's abundantly clear that that doesn't work in any other arrangement. And like you said, also it's a impossibly fruitless union. So I
Yep.
say impossibly, meaning there are couples who cannot have children, but that's not because they've got the union part wrong. There's a health issue there. That's not the same thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
Yeah.
you can't take two guys and end up with children, and you can't take two women and end up with children.
Yeah.
Um, and so it undermines a large part of God's design in marriage
Yeah.
altogether.
Yeah. This is where some of the natural law discussions that Christians have had over the ages is kind of helpful, because you have in nature a design, like God's good design in nature speaks of his goodness, and to reject that for something else is to reject the goodness, which is a reflection of God's goodness, right? So you can't embrace something that's outside of God's design and go contrary to nature in this regard and still be for God, because it's contrary
Mm.
to his goodness as displayed in his creation. Like that's also another thing. Like we're made in the image of God, and there's a kind of like there's something mysterious here. I don't want to like overstep the Trinitarian bounds of how you talk about this kind of stuff, but God is a plurality um, it's a plurality and yet a union, right?
Mm.
And there's a lot of discussion sometimes about how you have Father, Son, and then you have the Spirit. And what is the Spirit exactly? Well, the Spirit seems to be something between the Father and Son, right? There's something that like, and that's where it gets a little nebulous. I think that some Augustine may have said you have Father and Son, and the Spirit is the love. between the father
Hmm.
and the son. Well,
Yeah.
with a husband and wife, their love as they become one issues in a child, right? It's a
Yeah.
new person that also is uh, the fruit of that union, that oneness, right? So
Yep.
there's something there that's being communicated that I think is not, it's not a one-to-one analogy at all, but it is speaking of that being made in the image of God.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, let me throw another one at you. I encountered this, and you can apply this in multiple different ways, but I have never encountered this argument before in my life, and I recently was faced with it. And
Okay.
that is that the adultery in its most strict, straightforward understanding would be a person who is married engaging sexually with someone that he or she is not married to. Right? Do you agree with that? That's
Yep.
the
Yep.
strictest, most narrow. Okay.
Yep.
So the argument would be that someone who is not married is not prohibited from sexual engagements or encounters with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's that is that is called fornication, right? That's
Yeah.
it's a different thing, and this is where the implications of the commandment are like we're somewhat reading in between the lines when we look at just the commandment, right? We're like there's a world in each commandment, a whole
Yeah.
world, an ethical world in each one,
Yep.
right? And the reason why God addresses adultery and not fornication is probably because the goal is marriage, right? So
Mm,
like the goal of maleness and femaleness is marriage, and so the notion it's like he's dealing with the sin at the point of what the goal is supposed to be,
mm,
like, and that's where the Westminster guys would say this implies no fornication because the goal is marriage, and fornication is it's like it's like taking it's like we've talked about this before, but it's like taking covenantal goods, right, without
yeah.
having the covenantal right of initiation, right?
Hmm.
It's out of order, and also it reduces a covenantal good, the renewal. Like the one flesh union is supposed to reflect the one flesh reality of marriage, right?
Right.
And so if you're
Yep.
going after the one flesh union, what you're doing is you're lying about the marriage being there. So
Hmm.
there's a kind of that yeah, the idea that because the Ten Commandments prohibit adultery, somehow it's like allowing for fornication, I think is it's kind of like the same, it's built on the same sandy ground as the like, well, for same sex monogamous, that's also within, like, it's, you know what I mean, it's
Yeah.
so that, yeah, fornication is taking something that's meant for marriage, right? It's one flesh. It's a one flesh biological union, right? And it's taking it away from the covenantal reality that that biological act is meant to like seal
Hmm.
and demonstrate, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that it's interesting. We take any we can take so many commands and then just turn them into whatever we want them to because they don't
Yeah.
specifically uh, address specific things.
It seems like there is we haven't talked about this actually ever, but I'm just going to throw it out. It seems like there is a distinction. Like you have family in the fifth commandment, honoring mom and dad. Then
Yeah,
you have the prohibition against murder, and then you have this, which is adultery. And adultery essentially is murder, is covenant murder,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the thing that actually can destroy a covenant. So, not to start like rating all the sins, but it seems like adultery does something to an existing covenant that fornication does not do to an existing covenant, though it's still improper.
yes. It would still be sin and wrong, but is it, which one's more damaging? Adultery is like, we can rate things in terms of more damaging. Like
Yes. Yeah.
adultery is more damaging, and I mean the Westminsters would say more heinous. Like
Yeah.
they because they're, you are not just violating uh proper procedures, and it's almost like stealing. It's like stealing something before the proper time, right?
Yep.
But this is, to violate a covenant is a egregious thing, on top of the lust that, because lust leads you to fornication, lust also leads you to adultery. But when you lust and it leads to adultery, you're also lusting into covenant breaking,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
that's why it's more egregious.
Yeah. And one of the things that, so you mentioned the word covenant a number of times, and I
Yep.
think it's important for people to understand, especially I think it's not just for Christians, but people outside of the faith. Like why do you have this sexual ethic that's so important? And that's because our understanding of sexuality is more than physiology and
Yep.
biology, that it is those things. And God has made our bodies in such a way to be able to experience physical pleasure through sex with your husband or your wife, your spouse, but sex is more than physical interaction. It is like one of my favorite movies back in the day was It's a Beautiful Mind. Have you ever seen that?
I have seen that.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
So the main character, he's brilliant. He's played by Russell Crowe, and he's just so socially awkward. And he makes this comment when he's trying to like pick up this girl, and he basically talks about sex as if it's just this physical thing, and it sounds absurd when you hear him say it. But the reality is like outside of Christianity, sex is just a physical interaction. But the Bible presents sexuality it's not a lower view, it's a much higher view, that it
Yeah.
is, sex is a covenant making, promise making ritual act in which promises are reaffirmed. The promises of the marriage covenant are both established and celebrated and enjoyed and renewed. Which is why Paul makes this really weird comment in Corinthians that any if you have sex with a prostitute, you become one with her. Which is the last thing any guy is thinking. A guy never goes looking for a prostitute because he wants to be one with somebody. He's thinking, I just want a sexual encounter.
Yeah.
But like that's impossible. That doesn't exist. That's a non-existent category.
Yep.
All sex is promise making.
Yep. Yeah. Our age is very materialistic and wants to reduce everything down to its parts. And so what you see is like, and you get the same thing with the way people like try to justify their behavior by looking to animals. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just meat. So I guess
Penguins are gay.
Meat can just get close to meat, so it doesn't really matter what happens. But it's crazy because it basically destroys the very preciousness of it while it's defending its act, right? So, and I think that there's a bit of an inconsistency here with how people think about sex too, because no one like there are people who go crazy and just it's this act that means nothing to them. But I think that most of them also reflect in their own their own soul a brokenness there, right? And I think that a lot of times what you see is there's a reason why people who ascribe to it doesn't really matter. Well, when they get in a relationship with somebody, why are you upset when your husband cheats on you? Like, why are you? No, because you're acknowledging that this is a violation of a bond, right? This is a violation of something that was meant to be exclusive. Like, people know that. People know that. And I think that there are deviants out there who are trying to suppress that so hard that they I'm thinking about the porn star who also has married, and like, how does that, like, what in the world? Like, there are people out there who think they can have that job and then yet live a normal life, and I'm like, yeah, no, you can't. Like,
No.
and there are so many people out there who are, living with the massive scars and wounds from believing that that's all it is, just meat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's a reason. I can't remember what the specific statistic is, but it's astronomical that people who are part of, the porn industry, particularly the women, the instances of
suicide,
suicide and drug abuse is
drug abuse.
astronomical. Why is that? It's like because there's something in their soul that is deeply damaged and darkened by this thing that they subject themselves to, and of course, many of the women who find themselves in that position were exposed to abuse early on and were trafficked, and there's just a whole tragic story in the background. But there's a reason the suicide rate is so high, because there is an emptiness and a darkness from something that God intended to be so life-giving.
Yes,
in the context of marriage.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that also often gets elevated to a place of idolatry, right? And fascinating enough, there's if you go look at religions around the world, like most of them have rites. In historically, most pagan religions had rites that included some sort of sexual component, right? And I think that is that's something demonic going on underneath the scene that is basically utilizing something God has designed in order to create the illusion of union with something greater, something bigger, right? And I mean, there are many cultures. I was just reading about this a little while ago. Like many cultures that the initiatory acts of anybody coming into their religion includes some sort of sexual practice, right? And that's why you had all the cult prostitutes, right?
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why there's always such a tie between a lot of the prohibitions and the cult prostitute culture in the New Testament and in the Bible, because those two things were connected. Now, a lot of people today like to point to that and say, see, it's the fact that they were cult prostitutes, or they were tied to some idol worship, that is the reason why it's okay to do, like, to be promiscuous now, but back then it would have meant you were tied to some idolatrous cult practice, right? But like, it actually, I think it goes the other way. Like the demonic religions, right? Because like I think Paul talks about how they worship these false gods that are actually demons, are playing upon something that it has its proper place in God's order, and they're doing it in order to subvert God's order. And so you can subvert God's order without the temple, the pagan temple, but the goal is subversion of God's order.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of just jacked up exegesis today trying to defend a lot of the sexual revolution that basically, says, well, that, the concern wasn't really the sex, it was the pagan temples or whatever.
Yeah. We've both encountered that one. Okay, I got one last thing to throw you away, and then we're going to wrap this up. Okay,
sure.
Maybe hopefully this doesn't go too long. I've made an observation. There is, it's June, at least right now when we're recording this. It's Pride Month, and there's all the letters, right? And so you've got the LGBTQIA plus and whatever more. One of the things that I don't hear people contending for that actually I think there is still culturally taboo. Like there's shows that people will watch on this particular thing that's still weird, which is polygamy.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so why is polygamy weird? Should it be seen weird by people who celebrate Pride Month, and which is weirder, the LGBTQ or polygamy?
Well, it seems like, I mean, right now the polyamorous movement, which is just polygamy, is kind of being subsumed underneath the whole LGBTQ thing. So they're just starting to embrace it, which is what a lot of alarmist Christians said that they would do. Like
slippery slope,
yeah,
fallacy.
yeah, exactly. No, it's not so much a fallacy, is it? So that yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's going to be weird at all for the LGBTQs to embrace that. The interesting thing is to think about how, you know, you have to, as a Christian who has the Bible, you have to work through the issue of polygamy because it's there
Right.
in the
Yes.
Bible, and so that's too much to get into on this.
Oh, come on.
I mean, okay, let's see if we can do some boilerplate stuff. So,
Yeah. 5 minutes.
I think polygamy, like slavery, is a condition that is always the result of sin. And yet it creates new responsibilities, right? So in the Bible, there's no explicit direction. If you are polygamous, you need to divorce one of your wives and become monogamous, right? There's nothing like that. And because sin can get you into a polygamous relationship where you're married to somebody, and back then it was common for people to be, ever since it was in Ada and Zillah were the first polygamous wives of Lamech in Genesis. Okay, so I wrote a song
That's
about
good
that.
memory. I was like, how did you remember those names?
I wrote a song about it once. That's
okay. I feel better now for not remembering them.
So that was those were the first. That was the first polygamous couple.
Genesis 4, right?
Genesis, yeah, probably 4, something like
4.
that. Yeah. So you have, and then you have. I mean, you have people like, we know that Jacob was in a polygamous relationship, right?
Yeah.
We know that he was at least married to Rachel and Leah.
Leah, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not as clear that he was also married. I think he just also had children with the maidservants of Rachel and Leah, not that he was married to them. So you have, he got into that by a trick, but he also didn't, because he sort of got into a trick, his Laban tricked him, so he married Leah, but then he still, was working for Rachel, right? So there's just like all kinds of messed up stuff around that situation happening. And and so if you take the call to like not commit adultery, and then Jesus's prohibition against even like looking at a woman lustfully in your heart, you're like, is adultery in your heart. Well, you can't get into a polygamous situation without some form of sin, right? So sin is there's a sin that enters you into a polygamous relationship. But once you sin in that way and you actually have vows with two people, you're actually it seems to be clear that God wants you to be faithful to those vows. Now that creates a really, really messy situation, right? And so there's no choose one or the other, right? Because that would create an unjust situation for one of those women,
Right.
And so it's kind of like it's one of those things that I agree with the position that when the New Testament church is given the instruction that the leaders be one women men, that was to set the tone and example for everybody else that would lead to the eradication of polygamy in the paideia of God and the culture of God's people, and it worked. It actually it happened.
Right.
It's historically unprecedented to have completely monogamous peoples up until Christendom. So
yeah,
now we have what sort of worked. I mean, we have serial polygamists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the thing with polygamy too is that when you have, if you've got a polygamy is not contra to nature in the same way that same-sex unions are.
Yep.
So it gets the male female part right.
Yep.
Where it gets it wrong is the exclusive nature of that covenant.
Yep.
And but that's not what's happening with same-sex marriage.
Exactly. There's like God, like that the marriage between the man and the woman, even in a polygamous situation, is still something apparently where, even though it started with sin, it's still something that God acknowledges as a marriage, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but the idea that, same sex, quote unquote union, whatever that is, that's not even in the same category.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking, the reason I was bringing it up is like, there's this show called Sister Wives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's super weird.
Is that Mormons?
And yeah, of course. And I made this comment. I was like, well, that's weird, but it's less weird than Pride Month. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't know. Is there any record of a polygamous city being smoted in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
No, it's wrong, but it's wrong in a different way.
Yeah, it's not contrary to nature; it's contrary to covenant.
Yes.
Right? And it's something that establishes something that, I mean, it's you do not get from the Bible that polygamy is ever get the idea that it's a sought after good goal. Right?
No.
But you do get the sense that it is, once entered upon it comes with its obligations and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, on that weird note.
Yeah, weird.
You want to send us out of here?
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor.